Greetings fellow Mist Wanderers, my name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. Apologies first of all for my slow output recently. I had a good run in the summer of doing pretty much a video a week, but then my day job got busy and I put out a novel. Let me do the meme where the guy points. I can't remember how he does it. Maybe something like that. Yeah, life got a little bit busy, which meant unfortunately had less time to make videos. I always wanted to just try and do like 2 a month, and you know, when I have free time, I'll do more than that, but I'll see if I can try and do 2 a month going forward so that we keep the momentum going. This is the second of what I call my controversial 3 videos. The first one I did was talking about increasing the map size of Barovia. That is my most popular video by far as I record this. I don't consider myself a very controversial person. I hope people who saw that video understand that I'm not trying to say if you don't do what I say, or you do it a different way, you're doing it wrong. All I'm trying to do is offer like an alternative perspective, a sort of, if you're going to consider this, think about this, but then there's also that, and so on and so on. That's the way I approach these videos. I'm not trying to say, you've got to do as I say, or else you're not doing Curse of Strahd right. In that video, I basically said you can increase the map size, but if you do, be careful, it may have unexpected side effects and consequences to what happens to your campaign, because it affects 5e rules and mechanics and stuff like that. Anyway, if you want to watch that video, you can watch it separately. I just wanted to mention it. Also, well done to anyone who recognised the banner. It's a George Clooney meme in a movie called The Descendants, which is a really good film actually. He's spying on someone, he's just hiding behind a bank, just peering over, and then it became like a soon meme. And then I decided to sort of adopt it for this. Feast your eyes on my amazing image editing skills. It's hard trying to put grass in front of a face. When I came up with this video, I was originally going to say that there's only one really good way to introduce Strahd. And it's not the popular way. I'll explain what the popular way is in a minute, but you can probably guess what it is. However, as time's gone on and the more research I've done, I actually think the popular way does have its pros, it does have its perks, it has its good moments. So I've changed my tune a little. I'm going to talk about 2 good ways to introduce Strahd, but talk about the pros and cons of each. One I'll call the popular way, and one I'll call the alternative way. I ran the alternative way in my campaign. To be clear, when we're talking about first introducing Strahd, we are talking about Strahd, not his disguise, Vasily von Holtz, not someone on Strahd's behalf, such as Rahadin or the consorts. This is when the players meet Strahd face to face for the first time. And the cool thing about Curse of Strahd and Strahd as a villain, which you probably saw if you've read the book and read chapter 1 all about Strahd, is he's not a villain who just hides and appears right at the end. To quote from the book, Strahd isn't the villain who remains out of sight until the final scene. Far from it, he travels as he desires to any place in his realm or his castle, and from his perspective, the more often he encounters the characters, the better. The characters can and should meet him multiple times before the final encounter, which most likely takes place in the location determined by the card reading. So, there are a few times in the module, in the campaign, that it says, here's what you can introduce Strahd, such as if they try and use that magic mirror in the the Burgomaster's mansion and tried to get it to attack Strahd. And I'm drawing a blank on other ones, but there's all the times where it says, and Strahd appears and offers them an invitation to the castle. But obviously it's then left up to the DM to potentially add in more, and the big question is, when's the best time to first introduce him? And of course as well, it's worth mentioning that it's called, the campaign you're running is called Curse of Strahd. The player's going into it knowing that this character called Strahd is probably going to be the main villain. It's not like other campaigns where the villain just appears at the end or is discovered as it goes along, or it's a plot twist and the villain is this person. Nope, they know going into it, or at least the players do, the characters shouldn't, but the players go into it knowing that this vampire called Strahd is the campaign's main villain. So that's an important thing to think of as well, is like whenever you first introduce Strahd, they're going to kind of know who Strahd already is. He's not just some random person who may or may not be the villain later on. Let's talk about what I call the popular way, first of all. This is, if you haven't guessed it already, introducing Strahd at Kolyan's funeral in the Village of Barovia. I did a poll on the DMs group on Facebook, Curse of Strahd DMs, and 38% of DMs who responded say they introduce him here. So it's not just, and it was the most popular choice. So it's not just me saying, oh yes, the popular way. It is, according to this very scientific poll I did, the most popular way to introduce Strahd I'd seen it as well anecdotally on things like Curse of Strahd subreddit, where people would talk about it and the most upvoted comment would be, oh, you've got to do it at Kolyan's funeral. There are a lot of good things going for introducing Strahd at Kolyan's funeral. Firstly, it makes sense to introduce him there because he wants to pay his respects to Kolyan. Maybe if, with Strahd being a nobleman, it's like the right thing to do. He's, there to be respectful and, make an appearance kind of thing. It helps to make him a more three-dimensional villain. He's not just some sort of wacky cartoon vampire going wahahaha hiding in his castle. He appears at this funeral for somebody who, he inadvertently, indirectly killed because of the attacks on the Burgomaster's mansion in the Village of Barovia. And that helps to make him a more complex and interesting villain. I just think that's a really cool dynamic to introduce, not only as the DM, but then the players might be thinking that as well. You've got the beautiful thing where if the PCs play up, it'll reflect much worse on them than it does on Strahd. Who's going to start a fight at a funeral, for example? Strahd is just there to pay his respects, maybe just leave some flowers and leave. And that's all he wants to do, potentially, depending on how you play Strahd. And then so if one of your players is like, hey, you, we don't like what you've done to Irina, or that Death House experience, and they, just pick a fight with him, well, they're gonna, it's a funeral, they're gonna end up looking worse. And that's kind of an interesting dynamic as well. It's that classic we the baddies moment where Strahd actually behaves better and behaves more noble and respectfully than the PCs might. So yeah, it's got a lot going for it. There's a lot of good reasons to introduce Strahd at that moment. I think it has one big downside, and I'm sorry if this upsets people and you want to start typing, rage quit the video now and start typing the angry comments. My feeling on it is it's too early in the campaign to introduce him. I said it. It's too early in the campaign to introduce Strahd. If you're doing Death House, then it might only be the third or fourth session. If you're not doing Death House, it could be the second, maybe even the very first session, depending how long your sessions are, how much content you get through, how quickly you work through stuff, that straight away they've just started this new campaign and boom, there's the BBEG. And I think it's too early because it doesn't, at that point, they've not really learned much about Strahd and he hasn't really been set up as the villain. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the characters, the players know he's the villain, so there's no doubts about that. Strahd hasn't had what I determine to be an effective enough setup. And that's what I'm going to talk about when I talk about the alternative way to introduce Strahd. The alternative way to introduce Strahd is not so much a place, but a time. It's after the first visit to Vallaki. In my case, it was Yesterhill, because their first visit to Vallaki, they were given the Wizard Wines quest to investigate the reason for the shipment delay, and they liberate the winery, and then the Martikovs there tell them about the missing gems, and they go to Yesterhill. I actually played Yesterhill a little bit differently in Strahd. Rules as written, he intervenes and makes sure the ritual goes ahead, even to the point where he's attacking the players if they try and stop it. I just had him in reserve. From a distance, he rolled a high enough stealth check that he could do it completely undetected and just observe the battle. It was almost as if he was trying to measure up the PCs and see what they could do. And the reason it worked so well, I think, and then a lot of this comes down to what your players are like. I ended up having two very non-serious players. I had one who played a bard who, the player was a big fan of Critical Role and all the sort of wackiness and hijinks they get up to. And the other one I thought was a fairly new player to D&D, but he was a forever DM. And in addition to playing kind of like a sort of unorthodox character, a warlock, he also played an evil character, which, I was new to Curse of Strahd and new to DMing, didn't run an effective session 0. That's a whole other conversation for a whole other video. I do things differently now. But yeah, before we ran Curse of Strahd, we ran Lost Mine of Phandelver, and the villain in that story appears right at the end. And when my two jokey players were just constantly making fun of him, they thought he had a goofy name and a goofy nickname. They thought he was silly. They thought his plot and plan was silly. And it didn't help as well that his stat block isn't very strong. Even with minions and stuff, they steamrolled him. And even though I did the kind of popular mod, spoilers for Lost Mine of Phandelver, some people turned him into a Drider at the end, a spellcasting Drider. And they even defeated him easily. I was worried going into Curse of Strahd that they wouldn't take Strahd seriously at all. That they would just think that this kind of, just like they thought of the villain of Lost Mine of Phandelver, they thought, oh, it's going to be some goofy vampire kind of thing. But an interesting thing happens if you introduce Strahd later. I can't speak for things like Dragna Carta and Curse of Strahd Reloaded, and Mandy Mod and some of the other mod guides. But the vanilla Curse of Strahd, Curse of Strahd as it is straight out of the book, actually does a really good job of, if you're following its beats, it does a really good job of setting Strahd up to be this really scary, really powerful, not to be messed with villain. And I'll give a few examples. So they arrive to the village of Barovia, meet Ismark and Irina, who are terrified of this vampire who's bitten Irina twice, I believe. And they're so scared of him that they want to get Irina out of there. Overnight, if they stay in the night, they see the March of the Dead, where all these heroes and adventurers in the past have been killed by Strahd. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of people. They see Doru, who's been turned by Strahd, whether they help him or not, or they just destroy him or release him, or he escapes. And they might have a hard time just fighting this vampire spawn, and inevitably they're going to think, well, Strahd is going to be more powerful than this. They go to Serpool Encampment for the card reading, and I believe it's a box text thing you can do called a Vistana's Tale, where Vistana around the campfire talks about this extremely powerful wizard who came to Barovia, tried to get the village of Barovia to do an uprising, and Strahd swatted them like flies, including this really powerful wizard. And I think there's a clue there as well, where it kind of hints at, I think it says something like they hurl spells back and forth. I decided to just look, I've got a computer in front of me. Instead of saying, I think it says this, I decided to get the window open and have a look. And it says the wizard and the vampire cast spells at each other. So there's a tiny little hint that this isn't just a vampire, it's a spell-casting vampire as well, who's able to take down this very powerful wizard. Again, plants this seed in your players' minds that this is a very powerful vampire. And then they have the card reading. I can't remember if it's before or after the tale, but the card reading is for items that help them defeat the vampire. So that suggests that he's pretty tough to defeat, and they need to have these items that shed sunlight if they want any hopes of defeating him. Later they go to Vallaki, where they find a burgomaster who's so terrified that he might just show up one day that they have to have these weekly festivals in order to keep the town happy, because he believes that happiness is what drives him away. And when they go to the winery in Yester Hill, they encounter druids that worship him and doing chants and this ritual around this statue that looks like Strahd. Again, the PCs shouldn't know at this point, but the players all know, okay, if it's some dude dressed as a nobleman with fanged teeth, then it probably is Strahd. And then with all of that, and in my game they had the battle in Yester Hill, it was a near TPK, they were spent of resources, low on HP, a couple of them got downed. They decide to short rest, and 5 minutes into the short rest, Strahd comes and congratulates them. Well done for thwarting one of my schemes. And all of my players, including my 2 mouthy players who, in a past campaign, made fun of the villain, were speechless. They were terrified of him. And for me, that was like, yes. And, who's to say I could have introduced them at Kolyan's funeral and they could have been terrified of him then, but I don't know. I feel the later you introduce him to a point, that's something I'll talk about in a minute, but the later you introduce him in the campaign, the more chance it's going to spook the players, because they'll learn all this lore. They'll have all these mini lore drops of this powerful vampire that they don't want to can't and shouldn't mess with. And I think the biggest ones as well are the March of the Dead. We see thousands of dead, ghostly kind of people, and the Vistana's Tale with the, Strahd defeating this powerful wizard. Those are the 2 that will probably make them go, oh gosh, this guy's pretty serious. And this carried on through the whole campaign as well. It wasn't just at that moment they were scared of him. He appeared to congratulate him after they thwarted the Bones quest. He did his slow clap outside the church in Vallaki after they had reconsecrated it with St. Andrew's bones. That was when he gave him the invite to the dinner, which I ran like a lot of DMs do. Instead of it being a trap and there's trapped in the castle, it's a diplomatic, getting to know each other kind of meeting and things like that. And one of my favourite moments DMing Curse of Strahd, because obviously I was terrified that they wouldn't take Strahd seriously, they got there and Strahd is like, hello, welcome, come in, have a seat around the table. So, how was the journey? Did you encounter any monsters? I told you you'd have safe passage. And you weren't attacked, were you? And nobody said anything. I think my players were a bit nervous about saying the wrong thing, saying something might upset him, and I don't consider myself to be someone who's very good at improvising and thinking on my feet, which is probably a terrible trait to have as DM. But I'm really proud of this next line where I said, please, don't all rush to speak at once. And a few of my players just nervous laughed and stuff. And that was, I really liked that because I realised that Strahd had gotten into their heads. There are, of course, downsides to introducing him this late on in the campaign for the first time. First, it's risky if they're high level, and it's even riskier if they've managed to get hold of one of the two sunlight items, either Holy Symbol of Ravenkind or the Sun Sword. At that point, I would probably be nervous running Strahd outside of the castle, because in the castle at least he can escape through walls, he can get away from sunlight, but you introduce him anywhere else and he could be killed outside the castle, and that's a bit of an underwhelming end of the campaign. And even if, you know, you might think, oh, well, it feels a bit too late to have him introduced that point. That may be true, but I still had, thinking back and looking at my old notes, I still introduced him at least about half a dozen other times. So in addition to that kind of brief intro at Yester Hill, they saw him again at the Village of Barovia. I had the whole thing where Dora escaped, Strahd sent him back. They had felt obliged to go all the way back to the Village of Barovia to defeat Dora once and for all. And Strahd was there again, mwahaha, laughing, turned into a bat and flew back to Castle Ravenloft. He appeared in the middle of the coffin shop battle. I had him use the teleporter from the castle and he arrived right in the middle of the room, like, oh, all this fuss for a pile of bones. As I mentioned a minute ago, outside the church after the bones were delivered. They saw him at the dinner. They saw him at the abbey where he was ridiculing the abbot over Basilica and what Basilica looked like and how that was going. There was a time at the Wokta house, that's a long story, that I think was the last time they saw him outside of the castle, where it was kind of a trap and the Wokta house people, the sort of book club cult, and Strahd fought the PCs and then Strahd left on Bucephalus. He threw a fireball. I wanted them to know that he could cast fireball and spells like that. There were a couple of Vasily appearances as well, but I didn't go wild Vasily. He just appeared once or twice in different places. I didn't have it where he joins the group or whatever, that kind of thing like some DMs do. I think a lot of this, what this comes down to is your version of Strahd. Whenever people talk about Strahd on places like the Curse of Strahd subreddit, you'll often see your Strahd as a phrase being mentioned. Everyone kind of runs Strahd a little bit differently. Some people have a different idea of how Strahd will act, when he will appear, things like that. And you may like the idea of him being at Kolyan's funeral. You may not want him to be anywhere else but Kolyan's funeral. That's fine. If you want to do that, go for it. But my worry is when so many people say Kolyan's funeral is the best place to first introduce him, that it kind of gets treated as the bog standard. Whereas I kind of see it from a different way, and had an alternative idea in mind that worked well for me and my players at least. That's not to say it will work for other groups as well. That I wanted to do this video and mention it. For the rest of this video, I want to talk about a few other places that you could consider introducing him outside of those two and the pros and cons of those. I've seen some people say introduce him straight out of Death House. I kind of like this idea. They've just left this house and he kind of slow claps. He's like, well done, welcome to Barovia. And depending again on your Strahd, you might like the idea of he's there right from the beginning, watching these players and making it obvious and gloating and, kind of, flexing his muscles right in front of them as if like, haha, you pitiful people, and just mocking them almost the whole time. Again, I think that's still too early to introduce him, but your Strahd, you might want to introduce him there and feel like that's the best way to introduce him. Feel free. I heard a cool anecdote by a friend of mine who ran Curse of Strahd around the same time as me, where he was first introduced during the Feast of St. Andros. So the town is under attack with the vampire spawn from the coffin shop, because I think his players didn't do the coffin shop quest. The whole of Vallaki is chaos, and then Strahd just appears in the sky riding Bucephalus, and I think just mocks them, has some sort of cool opening line, I can't remember what it was. But I thought that was quite a cool intro, like there's all chaos around and then just Strahd appears as if like, can the situation get any worse? Oh yes, it just did, now Strahd's here. That could be an idea to introduce him there. That's a little bit later on than what I suggested. And again, there's the risk they might be higher level, there's the risk that they might have sunlight items, but I thought that was really cool. And what should you do if you leave it too late? Well, you need to be careful because, as mentioned a few times, if the players are high level, there's a risk that they can defeat Strahd with or without sunlight items, depending on their level. And especially if they have sunlight items, you get to a point where, if they get either Sun Sword or the Holy Symbol of Ravenkind early. So Holy Symbol of Ravenkind is even riskier because it can hold vampires, although Strahd has the legendary resistances. So if they did try it, he could use that to try and quickly get away, plus his legendary actions to move far away. But yeah, you'll get to a point where it may not be safe to introduce him at all. And then you may unfortunately have to do what some DMs do, which is just have him as a villain who just appears in the castle at the end. And it's not the best, it's kind of a shame and a missed opportunity, but it's one of those situations, if you're in that situation, there's not much else you can do, because it's going to be even more underwhelming if they defeat him outside of his castle, and that's the end of the campaign because they got him in sunlight. And that's it for this one. I hope I've not upset or angered too many people with this controversial 3 video, or one of my controversial 3. Again, I'll reiterate the point. I'm not trying to say that if you do the popular way that you, or a different way to introduce Strahd to what I said, you're doing it wrong. Just take this information. This maybe you were considering Kolyan's funeral as the first place you're going to show him, and now you're thinking, no, I still want to do Kolyan's funeral, but thanks for the info. Or maybe you're thinking, oh yeah, given my players and given how I want to run the campaign or run my Strahd, I may introduce him a little bit later on. I like to think I know Curse of Strahd very well, but I've only run it once and played it once as well. So there will be DMs who maybe have played it lots of times, and every time they've introduced him, at his funeral, and you know, maybe that is better. I don't know. Give me your thoughts in the comments. Be polite and respectful if you disagree with me. It was funny on the other video, the map video. Obviously there were lots of nice, you know, complimentary comments anyway, but there was one person who was like, I'm really sorry, but I disagree with everything you said, here's why. But the guy worded it so nicely, I couldn't be mad at him. And in the end, I was like, oh yes, I'll thank you for being so respectful, and here are my counterpoints to your points respectfully, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, if you disagree with me, fine. You know, I'm not going to be offended if people really disagree with me, but please don't hurl abuse at me, please don't shout at me or throw things at me through your screen. But yeah, leave a comment, let me know. Did you introduce him at Kolyan's funeral? Did you introduce him elsewhere? Some similar kind of time and location to what I did? Did you not introduce him at all until right at the end? Did you introduce him somewhere else completely and it either worked really well or worked really badly? I'd love to hear people's stories, people's anecdotes about how it went in your campaign. Next videos for Curse of Strahd are likely to be, should you surprise your players with Curse of Strahd? This comes up now and again. It was one of the very first questions I ever asked in the Curse of Strahd community, because when I was a player, I had no idea the DM was going to be running Curse of Strahd. I was just kind of, you know, much like the character. I was like, oh, where are we going? Oh, we're in this place called Barovia now. And I was considering doing it for my players as well, but I'm going to do a quick video kind of talking about whether you should or you shouldn't. It's very much a yes-no answer, but it's worthy of a quick video, I think. And my third of controversial 3 videos, which I'll be very nervous putting out because I'll be disagreeing. Again, another scientific poll I put on the Curse of Strahd DMs Facebook group, where I think over 50% of DMs do this certain thing at Curse of Strahd, and I'm going to say, don't do it this way. But also don't do it the rules as written original way either. I found what I'd like to think is a nice in-between. I also do Ravenloft videos as well, so if you're thinking of doing some Ravenloft one-shots or a sequel campaign, which is what I'm running now, you may find some of them useful. The next ones I'm going to do are the Island of Markovia. I believe the Abbey of St. Markovia in Kresk in Barovia is kind of a nod and a homage to the original Markovia. And I'm also going to do Forlorn, which, if you know your Ravenloft lore, was the second ever Domain of Dread, Barovia being the first. My players are there at the moment. They're about halfway through, so I'm going to do a 2-parter video because I'm worried that by the time we finish the whole domain, I've forgotten how the first half went. And so I'm going to do a video while it's fresh in my mind, and then a couple of months later do a part 2. And that's it for this one. Thank you, Miss Wanderers.